Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. This is the Dhammapala Memorial Dhamma Talk. This is in honor of the founder of Maha Buddhist Society, the Venerable Dhammapala. Now here, his story is a wonderful example of how metta bhavana, could overcome very great difficulties in life. Now he founded Maha Buddhist Society, as all of you know. I will relate his early life a little bit before I tell the exact, the episode where he demonstrated the power of metta bhavana. That is, meditation on universal love. How it can be practically used as a tool to overcome a number of great problems and difficulties of life. Now that is going to be the topic of the subject, topic of this Dhamma talk. The Venerable Dhammapala he is from Ceylon. He was born in a very rich business family that traditionally owners of big business, plantation, this, that and so on. Very devout Buddhist family known as the Heva family. Now this family was responsible for bringing out the entire Tipitaka in Sinhala script, and the earliest that when I was there, we studied in that, edition, and it was a very indeed a very great help for the people of Ceylon to see Tipitaka printed in Sinhala language. Those days Ceylon was heavily influenced by these Portuguese and Dutch and later on the English missionary movements. Now people in the time of Dhammapala, people had to send, particularly people from middle class families or upper middle class or rich, they had to send their children to these missionary schools. And these children had to be, their names were, the Sinhala names were removed. They were given all kinds of fancy European names. Now Dhammapala himself was some Don De Silva or some such fancy name. And he was brought up strictly every Sunday they had to go to the church to hear. And very heavily they were influenced by Westernization, so-called, but actually it was not Westernization, it was Christianization. So the rich families, the middle class, upper middle class families, and all those who mattered in Sinhala Buddhist society, they were all, affected in a very powerful manner in the so-called Westernization, learning of English and modernization and so forth. So now Dhammapala, he had a great conflict in his mind from his very early days. Here he was studying in the Christian missionary school and very heavily loaded everything by this Christian culture and Western, in the name of Western culture. And here you are at home, they were very devout Buddhists. And they used to go to the temple regularly on Uposatha day, and his mother, his father, they are all very devout Buddhists. So here he was being trained in a missionary school to become completely, Westernized, that is Christianized, and were rich people, so that was the fashion of the day. And at home it was different. So now at that time, there was a thing called Sinhala nationalist movement. It had something to do with the Indian national movement. And the leaders were all Buddhist leaders. So on one hand, their children were all being educated in missionary school because that's the only school available. So on the other, this movement started, and Dhammapala got involved in that movement too. He became a student leader and he was marked, you see. But later, one Colonel Olcott and Madame Blavatsky, Theosophist leader, they were stationed in Madras, that is present Chennai. And in Adyar they had a huge establishment of Theosophical Society, very well known. Throughout the world it had branches and they are very well known. The Theosophists taught it was a kind of khichdi religion, a cocktail religion, new kind of religion, where the different teachings of the East, say, there is Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, all put together, they made a mixture, a very palatable khichdi, so to say. And so they went all over the West and they gave lecture. So now in the Western, the people were used to Christian culture and Christian teachings. So when they heard this theosophy, and they became, a large number of people got influenced by that. And London became the headquarters of theosophy. So London being the cultural, not only political headquarters, but cultural headquarters too of the West. So this theosophical movement, Colonel Olcott, who was actually one of the heroes of American independence movement, so he became interested in theosophy. He went to New York and he got interested in that thinking, that mode of thinking. And Madame Blavatsky was a Buddhist because she was a Russian, and she followed the Tibetan, the Lamaism it was called at that time. So she followed Lamaism. And this Tantric Buddhism, she believed in this Tantric Buddhism, which is another khichdi, another mix-up. And so now they met, Olcott and Madame Blavatsky in London, and they became very firmly convinced about theosophy. And this kind of, the Indianized type of religion. So theosophy, being influenced by them, they came to Adyar and stationed there. They became permanent members and they were stationed there. They had heard about the other traditions of Buddhism, such as the different types of Mahayana. She has taught, in China, in Japan, they are all different. There are many different sects of Buddhism in China and Japan and different Southeast Asian countries, except in Burma and Thailand, where it was the Theravada, the original teachings of the Buddha were preserved in their pristine purity. And so also it was in Ceylon, in Sri Lanka. So Colonel Olcott thought of visiting Ceylon, which was very close, and see for himself what kind of teaching they were giving. So he came to Ceylon and he met the great Sri Sri Sumangala Nayaka Thera, a great teacher of Dhamma, who was head of the Vidyodaya University. At that time it was only a Parivana, and it's a Buddhist institute. So he discussed with him very extensively about the different teachings of Buddha. Sri Sumangala was able to convince him about the original teachings and the purity of the original teachings, and he taught him also. So once he studied, there was no going back at all. He became a thorough, he took Panchashila, he became a Buddhist. For the first time, he renounced all his old religious beliefs and all that sort of thing. And he became a very, very good Buddhist. And stayed in Ceylon, and he would go to Madras also, in Adyar. And then he influenced the life of these young people, Dhammapala being one of the most prominent one among them. And he saw the westernization movement in Ceylon, particularly among young people. So he told Dhammapala, well, Buddha has taught such wonderful thing, why do you call yourself Buddhist, but you are following all this? You treat Buddha as a god and all that sort of thing. So Dhammapala for the first time when he heard his lectures, profoundly he became influenced by his talks. So Dhammapala suggested that why don't you give a series of talks on Buddhism, that you have now become a Buddhist. Why have you become a Buddhist? What made you take to Buddhism from Theosophy? And earlier he was a Catholic. So now he said, yes, we'll do that. So Dhammapala got a car, some ramshackle old vehicle, and he got a driver also. And he took this colonel, and all over Ceylon they started this giving talks on Buddhism. And by doing so, all court became very highly influenced by the Sinhalese culture also, and the Sinhalese Buddhist culture and the Buddhist civilization. So he taught Dhammapala. Then Dhammapala thought, you see, it's such a wonderful thing. One day, in a lecture, in a place called YMBA, Colombo, that is the Young Men's Buddhist Association, or the predecessor of that movement. So there he said, look, I was reading the life of the Buddha. So if you want really to know Buddhism, you must know who taught Buddhism. That is the Buddha and his life. He said, look here, I will give you some instances in this talk. He said, when he was just a baby, a 4-year-old boy. Now one day the nurses took this boy to a festival where the king himself was supposed to till the ground. It was an annual festival, some agricultural festival because the Sakyan country was famous for producing the best of rice, the very fragrant rice. What we have got now, here we have got some fragrant rice. But the Sakyan country had the very best type of it seems. So the movement, agricultural movement had particular relevance to their life. So there, this child, now she was witnessing. Under a tree he was seated, and his nurses had gone to see the tilling, festivities and enjoy the festivities there. So this boy saw that while the father was tilling the ground, you see, the ploughing, in the ploughing ceremony, he saw that little insects were coming out, white little insects were thrown out in this tilling. And he was profoundly shocked to see these little creatures coming up and birds all over, just picking them up and swallowing them. So he began to wonder, what is this? Life living on life. Why should such a thing happen? Now mind you, though 4-year-old, he was going to be the Buddha, the supremely enlightened teacher of gods and men. So this child had all the potential of a Buddha's wisdom. So he became very, very meditative, and he entered into the first jhana, into a samadhi, a state of samadhi, and he was completely lost in that. So now after several hours of these festivities, the father or king also came there in that tent where the boy was seated under the tree. They found him completely in samadhi. So the father was so awe-inspired, he bowed down at his feet. That was the first time he saluted his child, his son. Like that, number of events, Colonel Olcott quoted. Dhammapala had never heard these kind of stories. He was so profoundly moved by these stories. So he started now studying the life of Buddha very, very seriously from the original texts available to him, you see, through his teacher. He went to the monks and he said, Bhante, you please tell me about the life of the Buddha. So these monks gave wonderful accounts of the life of the Buddha. So he was totally influenced now, and a young man, he became a very convinced Buddhist. He gave up eating meat, gave up all kinds of things. He said, Panchashila, if I have to follow, so how can I eat all this? But now it was a fashion among Buddhists to eat beef and pork, because they have been taught in the church, you see, you have to eat all these things if you want to be fancy. So now he gave up all this fancy eating in the hotel, in the restaurants and all that sort of thing, and became very devout sort of Buddhist. And he took to Brahmacharya. Later he said, I will go for, you see, a tour of holy places. That is how he came to India. He went first to, he had very good contact in Calcutta, because through his, his people are very rich and they are having export and import trade with India, very vast trading, this tea and all kinds of things. So now he met some of the very important people in Calcutta, and he stayed with them, Bengali families. He knew Sir Asutosh Mukherjee, Sir, you see, Manmata Banerjee, all these titled people, the Chief Justice of Calcutta High Court, and all these people, Neil Mohan somebody, Chowdhury and all that. So he went, from there he went to Buddha Gaya with all these good contacts. There he saw the temple in a very miserable state. Buddha images were being used, you see, as Deva. It was a Devalaya, some kind of, you see, they had turned the Buddha into a god. And a very, very dilapidated state, in a miserable condition indeed. And it was under the control of a sadhu, of a Mahant, he called himself a Saivite Mahant. And he exploited the place. You see, the place was nothing, filled with jungle everywhere. And nobody ever went there, you see, except some pilgrims from Burma and some from Ceylon. Once in a while, great difficulty, they will come there and they will do some puja, etc. But these pujaris never allowed them to do the puja in their own way, unless they were bribed heavily. And so they were all very ill-treated in a terrible way. Dhammapala, when he saw this, he was a spirited young man and a leader of some kind of the national movement. So he started, he protested, and he said, no, Buddha is not a god, and this, that, and so on. And he demanded that the Buddha images should not be plastered with all those, the white powders and all kinds of things. So he says, no, we will worship in our own way. And they said, all right, you put money. They said, okay, I will give you money. He had plenty of money anyway. So, like that, he remained in Buddha Gaya for several days. And he studied the situation very thoroughly. Under the Bodhi tree, which was the holiest spot, he found these people doing all kinds of tantric rituals. And he was horrified. So, and he decided under the Bodhi tree, he took a vow. He said, well, I will give up my life of luxury and plenty. I will become an anagarika and devote my whole life to the one goal of restoration of Buddhist holy places to Buddhists of the world. And he took a vow, he said, Lord Buddha, I took a vow as your servant that my life is dedicated to the restoration of holy places like this to the Buddhist community of the world and not only of India. So he said, I will start a society in the name of you, the Bodhi tree, and that is where he started Maha Bodhi Society. Now this Mahant came to know all that, and he sent his gundas and gave him a good beating there. Now when he received this beating and his whole body paining and all that, and he was a nationalist, he really got, angry. And he decided to take to law, and he went back to Calcutta. He told his stories to Ashutosh Mukherjee, who was the Chancellor, Vice Chancellor of the Calcutta University, very spirited man himself. And he told his son, Sama Prasad Mukherjee, you come on, you take this young man and you work with him. Like that, a movement started in Calcutta. They called so many very big people there. They went to the governor, and governor had a hold over this. At that time, Buddha Gaya was under Calcutta. So, this movement in a big way, he established an office there. He went to Burma, he went to Ceylon, first of all Ceylon, started a movement, restoration of holy places. Then he went to Burma in a ship. He went to Japan, he went to China, all Buddhist countries at that time, and told his stories about how he was beaten and how these Buddha temples have been completely desecrated and defiled. And the Buddhists are not allowed to have their puja, etc. They were forced to do some kind of ritual, tantric ritual and all that. So then he was invited during what is called this World Parliament of Religions. Some of the missionaries who are very sympathetic to him in Ceylon and in other places, they said, okay, you better talk in this parliament and give your account of what you suffered from. So that is how he went to US. He had sponsors, and he went there and he gave his account there. And there he found Swami Vivekananda, also representing Hinduism. Both of them became friends. And he said, look here, I'm going to start a movement in the name of my Guru, Ramakrishna Mission. And Calcutta is heavily influenced by these missionaries, and people are also getting westernized and all kinds of things. So that is how the movement of Maha Bodhi Society started in Calcutta. So these people collected money, and now he found a very big millionaire donor, a lady in Hawaii. So she gave him plenty of money to build a headquarters, Mahabodhi Society headquarters in Calcutta, and offices in various places. So with all that huge dollar fund available to him, Dhammapala now he collected some young monks from Ceylon and started his headquarters in various places, say in Benares, Sarnath in a big, big way. Calcutta, Sarnath, then Calcutta, various other holy places. And Mahabodhi Society during his time thrived. He started this Buddhist pilgrimage movement. So hundreds and thousands of pilgrims came from all over the world and to see these holy places. And my goodness, they were so profoundly inspired. The presence of the Buddha was felt by them in a very, very profound way. And they helped Mahabodhi Society, founded by Dhammapala. And then of course later on Dhammapala passed away and these monks, they had nobody to guide them. Later on this movement sort of dwindled into a pure and simple tourist movement. Then the business community from all these countries, they are like hawks. They all gathered together and it became a tourist movement. Mahabodhi Society became, unfortunately, a center just for feeding these foreign tourists, and they got involved in business and the whole thing became a business-oriented thing. Now the original goal of Mahabodhi Society, you see, that Dhammapala had formulated himself, and he worked hard for it. He went to Birla, these, that, and got a lot of help. He founded these dharmasalas with the help of Birlas and others. Now, you see, that part of it, the revival part of it, just went into the background and nobody cared. Not one Indian Buddhist monk was ever ordained. But a few of them, on their own, they came in contact somehow. And they studied and they went to Ceylon, they went to various places and became monks. Rahul Sankirtayan, Ananda Kausalayan, Jagadish Kashyap, then I myself, and Buddharakkhita and so on. So some of these are the first Indian monks in and they found that this tourist movement had nothing to do with the revival movement. So the story of Bangalore Mahabodhi Society was that, you see, I happened to be, I was invited by Burmese government during the Chhatta Sanghayana and involved in that. And then came Jagadish Kashyapji said, look here, now Jawaharlal Nehru has given us money to start this Nalanda, you come and teach there. So I went there and taught, but then they wanted me to be a government servant, so I didn't like to be a government servant. So during 2,500 years, I resigned and went to Bodh Gaya. And there I saw, it was, you see, Dhammapala's movement has succeeded. All the holy places were restored and Government of India took over under the, you see, the archaeological department. All these temples came and they really cleansed the whole thing. The places became very nice, big, you know, the temples were restored. A lot of money was spent by the government, the archaeological department. And then Dhammapala established his headquarters everywhere in a big way. And monks were put there. And of course they did their very best, you see, to teach. But mostly they got involved with a large crowd of foreign tourists from Ceylon, Burma, everywhere throughout Asia and Europe and America. So Dhammapala, he did his best and he succeeded in restoring all these holy places to the Buddhist of India and then Buddhist of the world. So his task was successful and fulfilled, but the revival of Buddhism in India remained to be done, and that was taken up by some of our Indian monks, and I happened to be one of them, and started here. We came in 56 when we had the Buddha Jayanti, 2,500 years. I stayed in Buddha Gaya for a month and did puja, and after resigning I thought what to do. Then Dhammapala's niece, Mrs. Munasingha, came to me, and she was a Dayaka when I was in Ceylon studying under great teachers. So she was my Dayaka Amma. So she said, why don't you, Bhante, take up this Bangalore project? They had given us this land and nobody there to do anything. That is how we came and started Mahabodhi Society here. Now this is the story of Mahabodhi Society in Dhammapala day. He is the great founder of the Mahabodhi Society. And the various centers that we have, now they are mostly, I'm sorry to say, the revival work is not their work anymore. They are more concerned with the tourist and foreign, pilgrim, etc. I wish they take it up in a big way. And but here in Bangalore we did our very best, and here we have a good center now. And we have taken up a lot of work. Venerable Ananda has been doing very fine work. He is the General Secretary. And my other pupils, Venerable Sanghasena and so on. We have many centers now in Arunachala. Very good, centers have been opened up there. We have got the latest program is the Mahabodhi College there for the Buddhists. Now Arunachal is the one state in whole of India where we have Buddhists who have preserved the original teachings of the Buddha. They are all Buddhist tribes, originally from Burma, and before that from Yunnan, Thai country. And they are very devout Buddhists. There are these Khamtis, Simpu, Phakia, Aiton, and these Khamya, and so on, very many. They have retained their, Buddhist traditions. So the false propaganda by sectarians who say, no, we succeeded in wiping out Buddhism from the face of India. They post. That is 100% lie. Buddhism never died. It existed, but in hibernating form. It's like a big bear in a huge Himalayan cave, sleeping for 6 months, hibernating. Thereafter it comes out and becomes very, very active. So the original Buddha's teachings are very much alive. The bare Buddhism is awake, and my dears, all of us should dedicate our lives like the great, our pioneer, Venerable Dhammapala, like him. So with this I conclude. May the grace of Lord Buddha, may the blessings of Buddha, his Dhamma and Sangha surround your lives with wisdom and well-being. May you all be happy and well. Sukhino bhavantu.